complicated, okay? So in the Bible, what it tells us is that God needs a king for the nation of Israel. And he sends a prophet named Samuel to find a king, and he goes to the house of Jesse. And in the house of Jesse, he finds David, who's the youngest boy, and he says, you will in the future be the favored king of Israel, okay? And David, in his early age, does wonderful things. For example, he defeats Goliath, okay? So you've heard the story of David and Goliath, right? But after he kills Goliath, the king, Saul, becomes envious, jealous of David, and that forces David to run away. Eventually, Saul is killed, and David comes back and becomes king, okay? That's the story in the Bible. Guys, as you learn in this class, this is all propaganda, okay? What really happened is that Saul is king, David is the mercenary, and he's a very good and popular mercenary. He has a lot of soldiers who follow him, and therefore, he kills Saul and becomes king himself, okay? But now, what the Bible needs to do is legitimize David, okay? Try to tell us that, oh, no, David is not ambitious. He was not ruthless. God willed him to be king, okay? And that's why the Bible was written the way it was. So this is written by the court historian, okay? The person who wrote Genesis is a person we call the Yahwehist, okay? Because for her, the God is Yahweh, the Yahwehist, or J. This person is a court historian. So his job is to clean up the image of David, to tell the story of David again, but in a much more clean way that absolves him of any crimes. Okay? So, where we are on the story is that Saul is dead. But Saul's family is still around. And Saul's family has a general named Abner, okay? But after Saul is dead, Abner feels slighted by the family. So Abner's like, screw this, I'm going to go and support David. And David, of course, is very happy, okay? All right. Abner came with 20 men to David at Hebron. David made a feast for Abner and the men who were with him. Abner said to David, let me go and rally all Israel to you in order that you may take a covenant with me and you may reign over all that your heart desires, okay? So what Abner's saying is, make me your general and I will give you Israel. David dismissed Abner and went away in peace. Then the servants of David arrived with Joab from a raid. Okay, so Joab is David's general, bringing much spoil with them. But Abner was not with David at Hebron, for David had dismissed him and he had gone away in peace. When Joab and all the army that was with him came, it was told Joab, Abner came to the king and he has dismissed him and has gone away in peace. Now Joab and Abner have a conflict because Abner killed one of Joab's brothers. So Joab wants to kill Abner, okay? What have you done? Abner came to you. Why did you dismiss him so that he got away? You know that Abner came to deceive you and to learn your comings and goings and to learn all that you are doing. Joab came out from David's presence. He sent messengers after Abner. They brought him back from the cistern of Sarah. But David did not know about this, okay? So Joab goes and kills Abner, okay? Now, so if you read this story, you think that David did nothing wrong, okay? But if you think about it, there are lots of problems with this story. The first problem is that Joab, the general, is rebelling against David, right? If you're David, who are you more afraid of? Are you afraid of Abner or are you afraid of Joab? You're afraid of Joab, right? Because Joab has your army. Okay? So there's no way that David would allow Joab to rebel against him. So the only conclusion is that Joab acted with the permission of David. So David knew about this, okay? All right, this is a lie. David knew about this. In fact, David probably ordered Joab to kill Abner. Then the question is why? Well, if you're a king, you're most concerned about loyalty, right? If Abner betrayed Saul's family, there's a possibility Abner will come and betray you as well, okay? So this guy needs to be eliminated because he's dangerous, okay? And it makes sense because remember, David betrayed Saul, so he's afraid that others will betray him as well. All right? So this story even though it's a lie, it gives us enough clues to construct the truth for ourselves. And that's what makes the Bible different from other religious texts. Other religious texts are sayings or truisms, but these are stories. And stories are living things that we can reconstruct in our heads. Okay? And again, this helps us explain why the Jews are so creative people, because they grew up in a tradition of stories as opposed to truths or sayings. Okay? So they can constantly reimagine these stories for themselves. All right, so now we get to the most famous story of David. All right? So in the spring of the year, when kings go out to battle, David sent Joab with his officers and all Israel with him. Okay? So what's really important to know is that even though Joab disobeyed David and killed Abner, Joab was never punished, okay? Which tells us that Joab was probably acting on the orders of David. They ravaged the Ammonites and besieged Rabbi, but David remained at Jerusalem. Okay, so David's in Jerusalem while the army is fighting elsewhere. It happened late one afternoon when David rose from a couch and was walking about on the roof of the king's house that he saw from the roof a woman bathing. And the woman was very beautiful. David sent someone to inquire about her. It was reported, this is Bathsheba, okay? Daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite. So David sent messengers to get her, and she came to him, and he lay with her. Then she got pregnant, okay? Again, this is a very problematic story, because first of all, a woman doesn't sleep with you just because you ask her to, okay? And Bathsheba, remember, is married to Uriah the Hittite. Okay, so who is Uriah? Uriah is the best soldier in David's army. He's very popular with the men. So if you're David, who are you afraid of? You're afraid of Uriah. Okay, does that make sense? All right? Uriah is the person you're most afraid of. All right? So now he has a problem because Bathsheba is pregnant. And David's like, I need to fix a problem, because if Uriah comes back and discovers that his wife got pregnant while he's away, he's going to know that I slept with her, okay? So he has to solve this problem. So David sent word to Joab, send me Uriah the Hittite. And Joab sent Uriah to David. When Uriah came to him, David asked how it's going. And David says to Uriah, okay, you know what? You're a great warrior. Why don't you go and see your wife? But then Uriah doesn't go see his wife, because Uriah says to David, listen, your army is fighting for you. I cannot go sleep with my wife and feel good about myself while your men are dying. I refuse to be with my wife if the men are outside, okay? So now David has a huge problem. So what David does is he writes a letter to Joab and tells Joab, hey, go do this, okay? Set Uriah in the forefront of the hardest fighting and then draw back from him so that he may struck down and die. So David orders the assassination of Uriah. And Joab tells David, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead, okay? So I've done what you've asked me to do. Okay? So in the Bible, what it tells us is that David fell in love with Bathsheba, and his heart took over him. And that led him to go kill Uriah. Okay? But if you think about it, what probably happened was reverse, where David becomes jealous of Uriah, and he becomes fearful of Uriah because he's so popular with the soldiers, okay? Because that's how David got the throne, by betraying Saul. So he's afraid that Uriah will betray him as well, okay? So he probably ordered the assassination of Uriah to prevent this threat from arising. And then what do you do to show that you're better than your worst enemy? If you have an enemy, how do you prove that you are better than he is? You go marry his wife, okay? So that's the real story, okay? The real story is that David felt that Uriah was being better than him. He got very jealous, and so he killed Uriah and married his wife to show, I'm better than Uriah, okay? That's the real story. But you can see how the Bible frame the story in a different way. So in other words, the Bible was written as an apology for David to disguise his crimes. And the story of Genesis was written to show that God favors David, okay? Because if David is fallible, but what David does that's really important is that he admits his mistakes and he reflects and he improves. And that's what God does as well, okay? So David and God are the same people, and that's why Yahweh favors David above everyone else. Yahweh is looking for a friend. David is his best friend because David